Dear friends, welcome to another episode. In the past few hours, a public ultimatum from Donald Trump has placed NATO allies before a risky decision: send warships to help reopen the strategic Strait of Hormuz, a narrow sea lane through which nearly one-fifth of the world's oil supply passes. But here's the problem. Even after recent strikes targeting military infrastructure in Iran, Tehran still retains asymmetric weapons capable of turning that narrow corridor into a dangerous battlefield for any navy. So the question becomes unavoidable. Is NATO about to be pulled into a maritime conflict that no one can fully control? Now, to understand why this matters, we need to look at what changed in the last few days. The call that Donald Trump made, a public ultimatum asking allies to send ships and air defenses to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, changed the arithmetic of what had been a localized campaign. On paper, it is a demand: share the burden. In practice, it is a political pressure test that could raise the odds that NATO or NATO member navies find themselves confronting Iran's asymmetric arsenal at sea. In recent weeks, a series of strikes attributed to U.S. and Israeli forces has visibly damaged portions of Iran's conventional strike infrastructure, according to open-source imagery and official statements. Aircraft shelters, storage sites, and some missile-related facilities have been targeted, and analysts assess that Iran's ability to conduct long-range, coordinated air campaigns has been degraded. But those results are only part of the picture. Reports make clear that while high-end capabilities have been attrited, Iran retains a palette of inexpensive, hard-to-erase tools: mines, unmanned aerial systems, short-range ballistic and cruise missiles, and small, fast attack craft that are optimized to make a busy choke point dangerous again and again. Sources and maps are in the description. Why the Strait of Hormuz is central is simple numeric geography. Roughly 20 million barrels of oil per day transit through or near that narrow sea lane, about one-fifth of the world's seaborne crude flows, and a substantial share of the Gulf's liquefied natural gas exports also depend on routes that run through the same corridor. When ships slow, reroute, or face higher insurance and security costs, prices ripple across global markets. Economies in Europe and Asia feel the pinch. Fuel bills rise, shipping delays multiply, and insurance premiums spike. For governments, a prolonged choke on that route is less a local military problem than an economic and political emergency. From a military standpoint, the problem can be framed as two separate tasks: degrade an adversary's conventional strike capacity and secure a vital maritime artery against asymmetric interdiction. The first task, hitting airfields, striking storage facilities, jamming command and control, is principally an attrition fight. Modern air power and precision standoff munitions can disrupt or destroy infrastructure over a relatively short campaign. The second task is different in kind and far harder to close quickly. Maritime asymmetric threats are distributed, low-cost, and inherently disruptive. A single contact mine can deny passage for hours or days. Drones can shadow and harass convoys. Fast boats using swarm tactics can force larger ships to slow or alter course, and small mobile missile launchers along the coast can threaten transits without presenting a single decapitable target. That asymmetry creates strategic leverage. If Iran cannot sustain long-range conventional strikes without greater risk, it can still inflict economic pain and political pressure by intermittently closing or threatening the strait. Clearing that threat is not a one-off bombing run. It requires a sustained multi-dimensional maritime effort: persistent escorts for commercial convoys, dedicated minesweeping and mine-hunting capabilities, layered air and missile defense to protect escorts and neutral shipping, maritime domain awareness with reconnaissance and electronic surveillance, and legal and rules of engagement frameworks that govern who shoots, when. All of these require assets that are in short supply. Minesweepers are scarce, escorts must be numerous and committed for months, and effective air defense often needs aerial refueling, patrol aircraft, and integrated command structures. This is where politics collides with military reality. Many U.S. partners recognize the stakes. They import Gulf energy, their carriers cross the same oceans, but hesitation is driven by three connected calculations. First, the legal and political threshold. NATO is a defensive alliance, deploying its treaty framework into what some allies view as a regional bilateral confrontation raises rule of law and mandate questions. Second, domestic politics and public appetite. Leaders must justify the risk of their sailors and sailor ships being targeted, and they face electorates wary of open-ended commitments. Third, the day-after problem. Allies ask what the mission will achieve politically. If the goal is only to keep ships moving but there is no credible diplomatic plan to prevent recurrence, the long-term payoff is uncertain while the risks are immediate. Trump's public pressure is consequential because it effectively attempts to socialize those risks. Where earlier U.S. messaging emphasized unilateral capacity or quiet diplomacy, the explicit demand that allies contribute warships and air defenses places coalition building in public view and under pressure. That has two implications. One, it can succeed. Visible international presence could deter some Iranian actions and reassure markets. Two, it can misfire. It may force reluctant partners into hardened operational roles before they've secured a political mandate, contingency plans, or enough assets to perform the mission safely. In short, a public ultimatum can substitute political leverage for careful mission planning, increasing the chance of miscalculation. There are specific escalation dynamics to watch. NATO involvement remains a plausible but conditional outcome. It becomes significantly more likely if Allied or NATO-flagged vessels are attacked, if a formal U.S. request for coalition assistance coalesces into a NATO deliberation, or if a UN or multinational maritime security mandate is sought and approved. An attack on a warship or personnel that is attributed to Iran or its proxies would change the calculus quickly. National parliaments and cabinets often respond more decisively when casualties or clear losses occur. Conversely, a pattern of harassment focused on commercial shipping might yield a looser coalition of willing partners, rather than a NATO-wide operation, depending on who is prepared to take risks and which legal authorities those states can invoke. Three short-term scenarios are especially plausible. The first is continued low-level disruption. Iran employs mines and small-scale attacks intermittently, keeping transits risky and markets jittery, while major naval powers avoid deep involvement. The second is a stepped-up coalition maritime operation. A mix of U.S., British, French, and possibly other allied or partner navies establishes convoy escorts, deters attacks, and systematically clears mines, an effort that reduces disruptions but commits foreign forces to months of presence and risk. The third, less desired scenario is broader escalation, an attack that kills or significantly damages a NATO member vessel or personnel, prompts Article 5 debates or national retaliatory actions that widen the conflict, potentially drawing in regional actors and increasing the chance of miscalculation. Missteps can happen at multiple points. Military success against conventional assets can create a sense of strategic progress that overlooks maritime asymmetry, so even as Air Force hangars burn, the sea lane remains vulnerable. Political leaders under pressure may accept deals or authorizations that are operationally unsustainable, or they may refrain from demanding the legal and diplomatic scaffolding needed for a long campaign. And public ultimatums by design put allies on the clock. Rushed commitments mean gaps in capability or unclear rules of engagement that increase risk to both military personnel and civilian seafarers. So what should observers and policymakers watch next? First, declarations of intent from key navies. Which governments announce sustained deployments and with what capabilities? Minesweeping and escort commitments are particularly telling because they require time and specialized forces. Second, the pattern of incidents at sea. Attacks against commercial vessels, near misses, or confirmed mine strikes are red lines that change risk tolerances. Third, market signals. Insurance premiums for Gulf transits, freight rate spikes, and energy price volatility often precede hard political responses because they force domestic economic consequences. Fourth, institutional movements within NATO. Formal consultations, working groups on maritime security, or requests to invoke collective measures indicate an alliance grappling with institutionalized response options. This is a delicate balance. The strategic logic that justified strikes against high-value conventional assets still holds. Degrading an adversary's heavy strike capacity reduces immediate military threats, but degrading those capabilities is not the same as eliminating the ability to impose economic pain through asymmetric maritime tactics. The moment a public call converts that maritime problem into a political one for multiple states, the odds of broader international engagement rise, not inevitably, but materially. The central question now is whether allies will opt to share risk on a timeline and under terms that minimize escalation, or whether public pressure will catalyze commitments made without the long-term planning the mission demands. There are no easy answers. Securing a choke point is expensive, technically demanding, and politically fraught. The call that sought to move NATO from the sidelines into a shared effort was a force-multiplying gambit. It can spread cost, but it also spreads danger. Watch the force declarations, the incident at sea, and the diplomatic moves in capitals. They will tell you whether this becomes a contained maritime security operation or a broader alliance-level confrontation. If you want the detailed maps and source material I used for this analysis, check the links in the description. Subscribe for updates and watch our follow-up on how NATO and partner navies might organize maritime security responses.